Teaching StarCraft, Part 1, Episode 5, Macro. In this episode, we will discuss basic macro mechanics. Macro is a term commonly used amongst StarCraft 2 players to indicate base and economic management. Here we will talk about the basic theory of macro, break macro down into simple steps, discuss some basic macro tips, and talk about how to practice your macro efficiently. Basic macro theory. The basic objective of macro is to build as strong an army as possible in the shortest amount of time. Of course, this is a very vague statement, but for lower level players, it's probably good enough of an explanation. In fact, everything in this section of this episode is purposely left slightly vague so that it does not get too complicated for newer players. We will talk more in depth about macro theory in Part 2 of Teaching StarCraft. Now, the most obvious way to have a larger army faster is to have more income, since a higher income means more resources, and more resources translates into more units. Of course, just producing raw resources is not good enough. You also need to have the base management to convert those resources into units as soon as possible. Resources sitting in your bank are not doing anything for you, so they should be turning into production or units as efficiently as possible in order to allow your economy and production to start snowballing. Snowballing is a term I use to describe the way your income and production speed should increase somewhat exponentially over time. More income means more workers, means more income, means more production, means more bases, means more workers, means more income, and so on and so forth. You can see how all of that starts adding up and compounding over time if you are able to get everything done as soon as possible, instead of sitting on resources or not building up your economy early. A difference of one worker may be small, but over time that one worker will mine extra resources, which will translate into more workers, and sooner than later that one worker difference turns into a 2 worker difference, into a 4 worker difference, into an 8 or 16 worker difference, which is now a huge lead. However, be aware that each base can only support so many workers, usually around 16 to 24, so you also need to build additional bases to make effective use of a worker lead. The last thing to mention is that a large army is not necessarily a strong army. So while it is important to build up units quickly, it's more important to build up effective units quickly. This means not only turning your resources into stuff, but turning your resources into good or important stuff, such as technologies, upgrades, or a strong army composition. Macro steps. Although at higher levels, it is usually better for your macro to be fluid and continuous rather than be broken up into steps, this sort of macro is developed slowly over time and is not easy to do for newer players. To keep things simple, we will break down macro into a number of steps. These steps should be cycled through as quickly as possible to ensure the strongest macro advantage. Let's first talk about what the steps are and then discuss how you should be cycling through these steps. The first step is to build more workers. You always want to be building workers from all of your primary structures to ensure that your economy is building up over time. Step 1 also includes all economic related mechanics such as transferring workers to gas or additional bases. Step 2 is to build supply buildings, in this case pylons. Unless you have reached a supply limit of 200, you need to continuously build supply buildings to ensure your base can continue to grow. The third step is to build units out of your production facilities. Obviously, since the objective of macro is to build an army, this is a necessary end step to the macro process. The fourth step is to build additional production facilities for more unit production. This step also includes all production-related mechanics like add-ons or inject larvae. We will discuss those two mechanics in future episodes. The fifth step is to build more primary structures at expansions. This is commonly referred to as expanding and is used to make sure that you can make effective use of a larger worker count over time. Minerals will also mine out eventually, So it is important to expand over time. The sixth step is to be producing technologies and getting upgrades. You need to do this to ensure that your army is not only large, but also very strong. And that's it. 6 very simple steps to cycle through. Now let's talk about how to cycle through these steps. When cycling, there are 2 basic things you want to think about: the required items and the priority of the resulting items. For example, building workers has requirements including primary structures and 50 minerals per worker, and it has very high priority, since additional workers are pretty much the most important thing in the game. To make things easy, I have already ranked the steps in priority order for you, with step 1 being the highest priority and step 6 being the lowest. Of course, depending on how well developed you are in each section or step, the priorities may shift, since you cannot simply ignore a step in favor for higher steps the entire game. So for example, if you have not done step 6 for a full minute, it probably is very high up on your priority list at that time. Keeping that in mind, you simply have to go through the list in priority order, check if the step you're on has priority and the requirements to do it, and if so, do that step. If not, skip that step and go to the next step. Then, anytime you do a step, go back to step 1 again and repeat the cycle. This means you will, of course, be doing steps 1, 2, and 3 a lot more than steps 4, 5, and 6. Of course, as you get better, the ideas of priority get very fluid, so you start going to steps you know are the most important straight away, and start skipping steps you know were already taken care of recently. This is a little bit complicated and might be difficult for you to understand with just a text document, so let us talk about all of this stuff through a sample game and a sample macro exercise. Sample macro exercise. Here we are jumping into a game of StarCraft 2 by ourselves. I have kept a list of the cycling steps in the bottom right hand corner so that you can keep track of them throughout this exercise. Now right away I'm going to want to build a worker because that is step 1. And of course rally my command center to the mineral patch. Again, you want to be using the mechanics we discussed in episode 4 if you want to be doing these steps effectively. Now I look at step 1, I need to build another worker, so I do. Now I go to step 2. Do I need to build supply? I do, but I do not have the requirements 100 minerals. So I go to step 3. I can't build units, I can't build production, I can't build expansions or technology. So go back to step 1, build more workers. Now that I have the resources, I probably want to try to start getting up to step 2 once I get 100 minerals here. So here's step 2 coming up, build a supply depot. And then back to step 1, build more workers. Do I have the resources to do steps 3, 4, 5, 6? Not just yet. So we'll continue to work on step 1. I can also think about step 2, but step 2, is it a priority? It's probably not because I just built a supply depot and I'm going to have more coming up. So let's go back to step 1. What about step 3? I still can't build units, so let's skip that. What about step 4? I can't build a production facility, so let's do that. Let's build a barracks, because I have the resources for it. And make sure to hotkey and everything. Go back to step 1, build more SCVs. Now can I do any of the steps right now? Well, I don't have really any resources, so I don't think I can. I can do step 2, but I already have that supply depot up. So let's go to step 6, build some gas so that I can get my technology finished. And now I'll go back to step 1. Do I need to do step 2? Well, I still have 5 supply available, which is plenty, since I only have 1 production facility, so let's skip it for now. Can I do step... well, I don't know. I don't have any steps I need to worry about, so keep on step 1 for now. The early game is a little bit easier since you don't have much stuff going on. Step 1, make sure to transfer your workers to gas. Keep building workers. Actually, I'm going to save up for this orbital command here in a second. Well, I can do step 3 now that my production facility is finished, so I'll do that. And I'm getting close to supply block. That's step 2, so I make sure to do step 2. Go back to step 1. Well, my command center is still finishing building, so I can't do step 1. Can I do step 2? No. I already have a supply depot building, so it's step 3, build some more workers. Step 4, okay, I have a couple minerals, so let's build a production facility here. Also building more resources, making sure to use my mechanics to do these things very quickly. Step 1, I can continue to do step 1 again. Step 2, well, I just built a supply depot, so not very interesting. Step 3, already building. Step 4, already building. Step 5, not enough resources. But step 6, maybe I can get a factory out. This is also part of step 4 since the factory is a production facility. So that's good. But back to step 1, need to build need to build workers. Back to step 2. Do I need to build supply depots? Well, I'm getting a little bit close, but not so much. Let's not do that. Step 3, well, this is finished, but let's build a reactor instead. That's step 4, skipping step 3, but I'll discuss why this is important a little bit later on. Making sure to look at all my steps. Step 1, need to build more SCVs. Well, I need to build supply depot, but not terribly bad. I still have 5 supply. So why don't I go to step 5, which I haven't been taking care of for too long, and build a command center. What steps have I been missing for a while? Step 2 probably is going to come up pretty soon. Step 1 needs to continue to be done. Step 3, well, I can build stuff out of my factory, but I don't really want to build factory units since it's not going to be too effective. So let's count this as a step 6 building instead of a step 3. But I can build production out of these buildings for step 3. And go back to step 1. Can I build SCVs? I suppose I can. Can I build supply depots? Well, I'm building one already, but I'm getting supply blocked. So I might as well do the second one. Step 3, already building buildings. Go back to step 1. Already building. Step 2 is fine. Step 3, need to build some stuff. Step 4, do I need any production? Well, let's get a starport up. I'm going to build some starport units. So step 4 and step 6 taken care of by that starport. Step 5, already building my expansion, so not a big deal. Go back to step 1. Do I need more supply depots for step 2? I think to be okay for now, so step 1 is fine. Let's get a second gas here. Haven't been doing too much of step 6. Step 3, need to take care of step 3. Go back to step 1. Already building SCV. Step 2, am I going to get supply block? Maybe, so let's build a supply depot. Go back to step 3. No. Step 1, fine. Step 4, well, I think I have enough for now. Oh, my expansion is done, so I take care of step 1 again. Need to take care of step 1. Also need to transfer workers, that's part of step 1, so let's rally to my expansion. Step 2, that seems to be in pretty good shape. Step 3, let's build some more stuff. Step 4, let's get a reactor on the starport. Go back to step 1. Step 2 taken care of. Step 3 taken care of. Step 4 taken care of. Let's go to step 6. Get some technology up. Get the sim pack out. Gonna continue to go to step 1. Step 1 needs to be taken care of. Step 2 now. Step 2 is fine. Step 3, build some stuff. Build some units out. Let's get some marauders as well. Go back to step 1. Step 1 is taken care of. Step 2 is taken care of. Well, no, step 1 is not taken care of. Step 2 is taken care of. Step 3 is taken care of. Do I need more production facilities? Let's get a third barracks up. And step 3 needs to build stuff out of the starport. Step 1, is it taken care of? Not really. Let's build some more SCVs. Step 2, might get supply blocked in a second. Step 3, more units. Step 1, it's not terribly bad, but keep focusing on step 1 again. Going back to step 1 a lot of the time. Not really focusing on my army, notice. Back to step 1. I haven't done step 6 for a while, so let's get an engineering bay up for that step. Oh, looks like I might get supply block. That's step 2. Then back to step 1. Step 2 which I just took care of. So step 3, build some units. Build some units out of here as well. I'm getting some gas up, and again, the requirements of step 6 is basically gas based. So if I'm building a lot of gas, that means I have the requirements for step 6. So maybe I should focus on that step a little bit better. Step 1, it looks like I'm doing pretty well. Nope, missing SCVs here. Am I going to get a supply block? Well, I'm getting a little bit close. Let's build another supply depot here. Step 3, building some units. Step 1 taken care of. Step 2 taken care of. Step 3 taken care of. Step 4, let's get more barracks up. And I haven't done step 5 for a while, so maybe I want to be doing step 5 soon. But let's get these gases up for step 6 first. And now I gotta focus on step 5 since I haven't done that for a while. So its priority has gone pretty high up over time. But make sure I do a little bit of step 1, because step 1 is almost always the highest priority. Also about to get supply blocked. So let's do step 2 there. And now let's maybe skip step 3 in favor of step 5, since that is a pretty important step. So since I haven't done for a while. And now back to step 1. Done step 1. Step 2, but not really. Step 3, gonna do that. And maybe step 6. There we go. There we go. Okay, back to step 1. Build more. Step 1 is done. Go to step 2. Oh, I am going to get supply blocks, so better build a couple of these. Step 3, I can't really build stuff out of these, so let's go to step 4. Let's get some add-ons. And again, I'm supply block, so I can't do steps 1, 2, or 3. Already taken care of 2, obviously. So let's go to step 5 or 6. Let's go to step 6, get another engineering bay, get an armory up for those upgrades, get some technologies up. And then go back to step 1. Go back to step 1. Taking care of step 1. Also transferring workers as part of step 1. Is this done yet? No, so I can't do this as part of step 1. Let's go to step 2. Well, I did get supply blocked a little bit too early last time, so let's be a little bit more careful about step 2. Go to step 3. Build some units. Go back to step 1. Alright, 1 is taken care of. 2, taken care of. 3, not terribly well taken care of. What about step 4? How many production facilities do I need? Well, a general rule is you need about 3 production facilities per base. As long as you're keeping up with step 6 as well, as I just did here. So I have enough of step 4. I went to step 6. Now I go back to step 1. Actually, I need to go back to step 2. I'm getting a little bit of supply block. Step 1 is in okay shape. Oh, step 1 here. Need to make sure to do that. Go back to step 3. I haven't done that in a while, so make sure to build some units. Step 2. Maybe I need to build a couple of things. Step 1 is now finished, and now that I did steps 1, 2, and 3, and I had the production capabilities of step 4, I go to step 6 again. I'm not really focusing too much on step 5 because I already have 3 bases. 3 bases is a nice number to have, so I can in general skip this for the rest of the game if I feel like it. Now I gotta go back to step 1. Step 1, build more SUVs. Step 2, build more supply depots. Step 3, build more units. Getting a little bit hard to keep up with everything here. Notice how my step 3 is a little bit lacking since I'm trying to focus so much on other things. So press down mules for step 1. That's a mechanic of the Terran. We'll discuss that in the Terran episode. And make sure to transfer workers. That's part of step 1. Step 2, am I getting supply blocked? Yes, let's build some more supply depots. Step 1 is doing fine. Step 2 is now doing fine. Let's go to step 3. Need to produce more out of these structures. Making sure to do that. Step 4, well, I need about 3 more since my third base is getting set up. But do I have the resources for that while keeping intact with steps 1, 2, and 3? It looks like I might have a couple of resources. So let's build 3 more barracks and get to that number I want for 3 bases. 9 production facilities, 1 starport, and 8 barracks. Looks like step 2 is getting a little bit supply blocked. Step 1, am I doing well on that? You keep doing step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 4, I'm already done for pretty much the rest of the game. 10 production facilities is in general pretty good. So I can skip step 4 for now. Step 5, I'm skipping that pretty much for the rest of the game, but maybe build 1 more command center. So now I can ignore step 5. Step 6, am I keeping care of that? Oh, not really. So let's do that. And then go back to step 1 again. More SUVs, more units in step 3. My supply is almost at 200, so let's finish that off. And now I can ignore step 2 as well. So, making sure to continue to do steps 1 and 3, 2, 4, 5, and 6 are pretty much done. Well, 6 is not done. So I'm doing 1, 3, and 6 are the only ones left over in this game. Maybe build some add-ons here as well. And as you can see, I'm pretty much maxed out at around 200 supply, almost 200 supply, at around the 15-minute mark. So this is how you macro, and again, this is very, very fast. Notice how I was talking extremely quickly, and I was sort of skipping steps every once in a while, being a little bit more fluid than you will be over time. But as you can notice, I was a little bit sloppy on step 6, which is fine, because it is the last step. But being pretty good about step 1, you'll notice how many workers I have at the maxed out count. It's probably a little bit over, maybe around 80 workers so far. Maybe a little bit less than 80 workers when you max out. And you'll notice again 3 production facilities per base, about 3 bases when you max out at around the 15-minute mark, and having a pretty large army with a pretty decent army composition, not just pure Marines, but also a couple of these pretty strong medevacs, and also a couple of these Marauders, as opposed to just Marines in general. And of course, got my important upgrades for step 6, and around 2-2 finished when you maxed out, as well as maybe some of these upgrades if you want to start getting these technologies later on. So this is how you do a macro-based game. And before we go into the next thing, let's just talk slowly about each of the steps in general. Step 1, notice it was also using, not just building workers, but also using your macro mechanics depending on which race you play. That is the mule for Terran. and making sure to upgrade to orbitals as Terran. So this would be step 1, what I'm doing over here. Very important part of step 1. Step 2, building supply depots, pretty simple. As you get more production facilities up, your supply is going to go up faster. So you're going to want to start building those supply depots sooner and sooner, as opposed to waiting until your supply capped to start building them. So early on, if you're maybe 3 or 4 supply away from supply capped, that's sort of when you want to be building supply depot. But later on, maybe when you're even 10 or 20 supply away, that might be when you want to start building supply depots. Since you're building supply out of 9 production facilities at once and 3 primary structures, that could take up 20 supply very quickly. Now let's talk about step 3. Step 3, you want to be building units out of all your production facilities. The way you know you're doing step 3 well is if you have all your production facilities building at once. And then step 4, making sure you have your production facilities, as well as these add-ons. Part of step 4 and part of the Terran mechanic, again, which we'll be talking about in the Terran episode. And of course, building only the units you want to. I didn't want to use this factory for this particular game. So building production facilities, these counted as production facilities. The factory more counted as part of step 6, getting my technology up. And then step 5, notice how step 5 I ignored for the main part. But I came back to it whenever I had the required resources and the steps 1 through 4, and maybe even step 6 finished. Because step 5 is not only low priority, but has a very high resource requirement. So that's why you're almost always going to be skipping around it, unless you're banking a lot of resources, and steps 1 through 4 are taken care of for the moment. And then step 6, a little bit sloppy in this game, but making sure to get all your upgrades if everything else is taken care of, and you have some gas available, which is the required resource for step 6, you can start working on that. So that's this macro exercise. Coming up next, we will have some tips to make sure you know how to do this very, very quickly and very, very fluidly over time. Tips. Something you might notice is that minerals are a required item for all of your macro steps. This means if you are floating a lot of minerals, you are not macroing well. It also means you need to do a lot of macro steps very quickly in the near future to catch up. Since workers and production and upgrades have the requirement of available vacant buildings as well, they might not be an easy way to use those minerals. But the other steps, 2, 4, and 5, usually have very little other requirements besides resources. So you should try to focus on those steps if you see you are banking a large amount of resources. In particular, expanding is a good way to do it, since a single action spends a massive 300 or 400 minerals. Even though I put upgrades as the least important step, upgrades is probably the most important step overall. The reason I put it last is because you will only have the capability to upgrade in fairly rare occasions due to the lack of upgrade buildings, the slow speed of upgrades. So I don't want newer players to keep checking that step and then skipping it. Upgrades also require gas, which builds up slowly, and most of the time for newer players you're banking minerals, not gas, so you won't have that requirement. It is also the most important step only if you're keeping up with the other steps. Upgrades are much more useful if you have a lot of units to use them, but not so useful if your army consists only of a handful of units. But as you get better at managing the other steps, you should feel free to skip a few steps in favor of upgrades if you have both the upgrade buildings and the gas available. Also, even though producing units is step 3, with production facilities and expansions at steps 4 and 5, step 3 is probably less important during the early stages of the game. This is because early on, building an extra production facility or primary structure usually means doubling up the production, a 100% increase. So cutting a few units early allows you to get that higher production faster, which means you can catch up at a double the rate later on. Obviously, once you have 2 production facilities, a third one is only a 50% increase, and a fourth one is only a 33% increase, and so on and so forth. So step 3 gets more and more important over time, and steps 4 and 5 get less important over time. Step 6 is also important to keep up with in terms of technology early on. especially if you are Protoss, so keep that in mind. As you get better and think more about the game, you will start to realize how these priorities shift during time, and that's when you start macroing fluidly instead of following incremental steps, which is again the best way to play the game. In general though, steps 1 and 2 are always steps 1 and 2, unless you get supply limit of 200 or an optimal worker count of 70 or 80, which is generally not going to happen for newer players, so make sure to keep on doing steps 1 and steps 2. In keeping with this fluidity tip, you should always make sure not to overcommit to a single step so you can ignore it later on. So for example, a lot of players will take both their gas early so they don't have to focus on it later on. They might also build a lot of production facilities or a lot of supply so they don't have to worry about steps 2 or 4 later on. This will obviously make it easier for you to macro since you have less steps to do later on, but it is not particularly strong since priorities shift a lot depending on how well you are taking care of a step. So you need to be making sure to keep up with all the steps at all points in time instead of ignoring 4 or 5 of them in favor of the others. The last tip I want to mention is the race-specific macro mechanics. Each race has specific mechanics that help them produce units or economy faster over time. We will discuss these more in the race discussion episodes, but in general you want to think about making orbitals, as you saw in this sample exercise here, as part of step 1, making queens with larva injects as part of steps 1 and 3 for Zerg, and chrono boosting from Protoss as parts of steps 1, 3, and 6. In general though, these macro mechanics are the most important mechanic out there, and we will discuss again these mechanics in the race discussion episodes. For now, just use them as often as possible on whatever you think is important. Obviously, the race-specific mechanics are very important to use since they are all part of step 1 as well as additional steps. Practice. Now that you know how to macro, let's talk about how to practice macro. For newer players, the best way to practice is to play alone by creating a custom game by yourself and continuing the game despite your automatic victory, or by playing against an AI level which is very easy for you to beat, probably the medium level or below. You should also set goals for yourself. For example, if you are having problems keeping up with step 1, your goal should be something like creating 50 workers by the 10-minute mark. If you need to know what the optimal amount of workers you can have at a specific time is, create a game and only build primary structures, supply depots, and workers, and see how high you can get in the time limit. Then try to reproduce that amount of workers in the same amount of time while doing other things like building production facilities and units. 50 workers at the 10-minute mark or even the 9-minute mark is a pretty good goal to set for yourself. Although actually building 50 workers at the 9-minute mark is almost impossible. Similarly, practicing steps 2 and 3 would mean getting to a supply requirement in a specific amount of time. Practicing step 4 means getting to the correct amount of production at all points in time depending on your income. Step 5 doesn't really require practice, but is something you should be focusing on more and more as you get better at steps 1 through 4, and something that you start expanding quicker and quicker over time. And step 6 obviously means hitting specific upgrades and specific units with abilities at specific points in time. It's very important for Protoss, for example, to hit upgrades like Psystorm at specific time limits. Finally, once you have all these steps pretty good, you want to start putting all these focuses together. A good player will be at around 70 workers, 200 supply, 3 bases with full production capabilities, and maybe 2+2+2 upgrades along with your important upgrades, such as Stim Pack for Terran, Colossus range for Protoss, or Zergling speed and Roach speed for Zerg, all up at around the 15-minute mark, regardless of your race. Lower level players should be thinking about getting these things done at around 15 to 20 minutes. Professional players can get these things done at even the 14-minute mark, and their upgrades will be significantly better than anyone else. Now once you can do this, you need to keep doing it again and again, probably on the ladder now or against an appropriate AI level. This way you can start macroing while you're still doing other things at once, such as dealing with crisis situations or battles of extreme intensity. This will make sure you're trying to macro without thinking, as your thought processes are focused more on micro or battles. Now even if you are macroing perfectly in a solo game, you probably can't do this in a real game. So be sure to watch your replays and check out which steps you are lacking in during large battles. Especially during intense games, you really need to check on which areas of macro you still need to work on. And again, make sure to practice, practice, practice. The only way to have perfect macro in a real game with intense situations is to make sure you can do it without thinking. Make sure you can do it perfectly without thinking. And again, that's it for this episode. I'm Adon, and I'll see you next time on Teaching StarCraft. If you like teaching StarCraft, please support me by donating to my PayPal or subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Twitch and Twitter at twitch.tv/AdonSC and twitter.com/AdonSC. For more information and timestamps, please check the description below.